Everybody. Today we really want to talk about education. But first, and that's why we have Miguel Cardona, our great Commissioner of Education, and Beth Bai, Office of Early Childhood, talk a little bit about the school year, talk a little bit about summer school, talk a little bit about summer camps and the fall. But first, let me just give you an update on where we are in the numbers. I'll do this briefly. As you can see, positive cases changed since yesterday, 448. Fatalities, 77. Hospitalizations popped up a little bit. Remember, we've had a good downward trend. I think it was 8 days. 1 day is not something really to focus on, but it's just to keep in mind that this is by no means behind us. And we did do a fair number of tests, 3,300, and at least the infection rate amongst the positive cases was pretty low. You can see on the next slide the day-to-day change in hospitalizations. You can see what the downward trend was there, and with one outlier. But we watch this carefully because this COVID is highly infectious, and there's not a lot of margin for error. And you probably saw the President of the United States when he sat at Abraham Lincoln's statue at the Lincoln Memorial, where he said, I thought we were going to anticipate 60,000 fatalities, and now it looks like it could be closer to 120,000 fatalities. And that just reminds us that we better be very cautious as we plan going forward, and that's what we're trying to be. And you know about our May 20 date. You know that we're going to be able to outline some more of the protocols in terms of how businesses on a limited basis can start opening on May 20th. We're going to give you what those protocols are, but it's worth reminding that we're looking at the facts on the ground every day and make sure what we're doing is safe for you. Yesterday, the governor's residence was pretty busy. We had dozens of cars driving around in circles, beeping horns, shouting, give me liberty or give me death. Everybody was polite and socially distanced. I appreciate. But I was thinking, give me liberty or give me death. I mean, we can all be libertarians, and you should be free to be dumb if you want to, but not if it endangers others. And that's what is so deadly about COVID, that you're not just endangering yourself, but by being lax and not taking the social distancing seriously endangers everybody else. And when you wear a mask, it's not necessarily to protect yourself, it's to protect everybody about you. It's a different way of thinking what your obligations are. And that's why I continue to be strict about this and urge you to maintain the social distancing, because that's how we get this state going again, and that's how we keep to our May 20 date and beyond. With that, as you probably heard, Miguel and I had to announce that the school year, in terms of classroom learning, will not open up in this next cycle. It'll not open up before June 30, not open up until the fall, although we'll be able to talk about summer school and summer camps. Look, it breaks my heart. I mean, we were pretty early on in terms of a lot of the social distancing and protocols we put into place. I wanted to do everything I could to find some way to keep the school year at least partially open, just for a couple weeks, some sense of conclusion for our students. But Miguel has been informed by superintendents and parents and teachers across the board. We see a continuing increase in infections in many regions of the state, and this was no time to take that risk. So sadly, in terms of traditional classroom education, that will not continue in this school year. That said, I want you to know that we're going to maintain education in a virtual sense. I mean, I ran for governor. I wanted to be the education governor. I thought this was the most important thing we could do. I thought the quality of our K through 12, the quality of our colleges, the amazing workforce we had positioned us for the 21st century, and that was going to be my priority. And now I'm the guy that has to say we're not going to continue the school year in this cycle. That said, Miguel has been really good. We've taken the lead in terms of online learning, distance learning. This chart here you can see those who can teach, those who can't teach virtually. Thank you, Glastonbury teachers. I thought that sign said it all, and that's what we're really trying to do right now. We have, tens of thousands of reading materials from Scholastic being distributed to our schools across the state last week and this week. Bridgeport Early Child Education, Bristol, Hartford, Norwalk, making sure that those kids continue to learn. We're streaming the Scholastic content right now. Our teachers are amazing. They're stepping up. They're doing telephone classes. They're doing Zoom classes, online classes. And I think we've been pleasantly surprised, haven't we, Miguel, that I think most kids are taking to this. Maybe a guy my age, it seems a little not the way I'm used to, but for these kids, they are, and they are continuing to learn. And one of the things we're going to be describing to you today is how they're going to continue to learn this summer so we can help to bring people up to speed. Miguel Cardona was telling me that he's got a center where people can send in comments, and we've had over 30,000 folks weigh in. Teachers, parents, like I said, superintendents, everybody in terms of, because education involves us all, and the passions were deep. I think the feeling was, pretty strong that this is not the time to risk sending kids back into a classroom. A classroom is not a natural place for social distancing. A classroom is a place where people gather. And we're weighing that as we go forward into this new school year. Tomorrow, I should tell you that we're going to have our college and university team come in and tell you what we're thinking about in terms of the colleges and universities. But first, I think I'd like just to have Miguel Cardona give you a little bit of our thinking about this current school year and what we do going forward. And then a Beth By follow-on, in particular with what we've done on daycares to date and going forward, and in particular our summer camps as we try and keep our kids involved. Miguel?
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. And I'm glad to be here with Commissioner By as well. As you stated, class cancellation until further notice is difficult to accept for all of us, but one based on the decision of health and safety of our students, our families, and our staff. As one former student put it, it's not surprising, but it is devastating. For the students listening, your school year has not ended. Your teacher, school, and district leaders and staff are committed to supporting your learning for the remainder of the school year. While we know it's not the same, on this Teacher Appreciation Day, I want to acknowledge all the educators that have given tirelessly to their students while tending to their families and caring for their loved ones. Thank you. To the 5th graders, 8th graders, and adult education students whose promotion ceremonies will not be typical, congratulations on your upcoming huge accomplishment. The governor and I are proud of you. Seniors, as I shared last month, your high school and district leaders have been working hard with your input, trying to find a safe and appropriate way to honor your accomplishment. You worked hard and deserve to be honored. I think of seniors that I know like Kyle, Mia, Angel Lee, and the impact it's having on them. Students like Millen and Sophia who serve on our board, my heart goes out to you. You worked hard and deserve all the praise you're going to get. Congratulations to those of you that are going on to college, career, armed forces, and those of you that are staying in their community to make it better. We have over a month left of classes. Let's finish strong, Connecticut. While this decision to cancel is not welcomed by students, parents, or educators, we know that we have to continue to look at this as a safety issue. Further guidance on summer school will be provided later this month, with an emphasis on those students who may have additional learning needs. With proper social distancing and improving trends, the Connecticut Education Committee of the Reopen Task Force hopes to be able to provide summer school options in July. We are actively planning what a safe reentry would look like and are eager to open up our buildings once again. To do this, with the help of our REST, we're getting input from thousands of students, parents, educators, and community partners. Schools serve as communities of growth for our students, not only academically, but socially and emotionally. And we look forward to welcoming you back in a safe way. Thank you, Governor.
So Beth, how are we looking for summer camps? Unmute, please.
Thank you, Governor, for your leadership. And Miguel, it's been great to work with you and collaborate with you on the Education Subcommittee. Your comments are so important to so many families out there. The governor mentioned childcare. I'll just mention that childcare does remain open in Connecticut. Some programs have closed, the majority of centers, but some have remained open to serve those critical frontline workers in our state. And we're so grateful for their service. The governor asked me here today to talk to you about summer camps. Those that are licensed are regulated by the Office of Early Childhood, and there are also some operated by cities and schools. And so the rules that we are designing for camps will apply to all summer programming for children. I think the governor, Commissioner Cardona, and I all understand this has been a challenging time for families across Connecticut, and we're hoping for some return to normalcy for children and families, knowing that summer camps can open for their children in an environment subject to coronavirus prevention guidance. The decision of the Reopen Connecticut team, OEC, and the State Department of Ed was that summer camps can open on June 29th. That gives more time, and they will also have very specific guidance. Currently, there are about 5 camps that have opened to provide childcare to critical workers, and those can remain open as part of the childcare infrastructure. Other camps can open beginning June 29th. Working with Reopen, we've developed guidelines to assure added protective measures to reduce the likelihood of exposure to the virus for children and families. The camps that I've been in touch with at OEC, we developed a memo that's Memo 18 on our website where you can look for guidance. Much of that will remain, and there will be some additional guidance that will be released by May 15th. Right now, camps are making decisions about whether to open or not. That's up to them, much like childcare programs made decisions whether to remain open or not. And families are also making those decisions now about what are my summer plans for my children. So know that the governor has announced today that camps will not need to close, but they will need to live with some very specific public health guidance that we've worked out with Reopen Connecticut and the health team, and with the Office of Early Childhood. So by May 15th, those will be released with all the specifics. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Beth. And we're here to take questions, and Josh Jabal is here as well.
News 12 Connecticut.
Hi, Governor. The CEA, the teachers union, is calling for some very specific guidelines to reopen schools in the fall, including PPE for everyone, staggered school start times. A lot of the superintendents we've talked to today said those are great, but those are going to be very expensive, and some of our districts are already slashing budgets. What can you tell them about what kind of assistance the state is going to provide them to make those things happen?
Well, Miguel is working with a great task force that includes Don Williams from CEA, includes teachers, includes parents, includes superintendents, looking at the facts on the ground, and we'll figure out over the course of the next month or two what the fall looks like, if that's what we're talking about now. What are going to be the requirements? What are going to be the class sizes? What are going to be the masks and the such? I think it's too early to make those predictions right now, but we're going to give our school boards plenty of notice.
Is the state prepared to offer them additional money, though, to make that happen?
Well, we'll have to take a look at that in terms of what the requirements are there. We are getting some federal support for the schools as well. Isn't that right, Miguel?
It is right. Yeah, the CARES Act funding, which we applied for and we submitted the application yesterday, should provide some additional funds to support student needs.
NBC Connecticut.
Governor Matt Austin with NBC Connecticut. Was hoping to get a little more clarification about graduation for the high school seniors. Are you able to say if in-person graduations will be allowed or not? There was that petition going around for a statewide graduation to take place.
Miguel, do you want to start with that?
Sure, thank you. We know graduations are such an important part of the experience, especially for our seniors. We want to make sure that they're acknowledged for the 13 years of hard work. So we have been in communication. If you recall last month when I was on with the governor, we asked superintendents to give consideration to what graduation looks like. And I'm really pleased to say that these districts have not slowed down planning, having backup plans, and student input when making decisions about what graduations are going to look like. Districts are planning graduations with input from students, but also ensuring that they're following executive orders from the governor.
Hey, Matt, I can be a little more direct. I mean, while obviously our recommendation is probably a virtual graduation is the best way to go, and we don't see any in-person graduations this June, if I had to make an estimate right now. I think we're still looking at what happens later and seeing if you can have an outside graduation with the appropriate social distancing, and I think a determination on that will be made at a later time.
News 8.
For Commissioner Bai, I know it's not the state's job to find daycare for people, but do you have any guidelines or suggestions on what to do as the state opens back up, people are heading back to work, and the kids aren't in school?
Unmute.
Yes, I appreciate that question. It gives me a chance to highlight that indeed we do have a system in place to help families find childcare, and it's been pretty effective through the coronavirus emergency. Parents can call 211 Childcare and ask for childcare near their home or near their work, and they keep track every week, and we are tracking every week where the open spaces are, and we've been doing a lot to support the supply that exists of childcare and not lose additional supply. So we know there's still some supply, and families can call 211 Childcare. We also have a program for frontline workers that's open now that gives them a $200 subsidy a week to help them pay those childcare costs, because we know they're having to make additional arrangements if their programs are closed, and they can also enroll in that by calling 211 Childcare.
WTIC 1080 News.
Good afternoon. On the 60,000 laptops, did most of them make it, or are they going to make it? And is that something that could last into the fall with the distance learning?
They are going to start being delivered, I think, in the next couple of weeks. You're right, it's going to be phased in over a period of time, go in those commissioner districts, and it's going to be integral to our ongoing learning. My hunch is going forward, you're going to see a lot more online learning to complement what's going on in the classroom.
And I'm just being asked by somebody I work with about the one class, one graduation concept. I guess that would be a plan for smaller ceremonies. Have you heard of that?
I have. What I've heard from the Reopen Committee is the idea of doing one big thing on the same day across the state is probably not the right way to go. But they've reserved the option to say maybe we can have some outside graduations later on in the year, depending on the facts on the ground.
I guess some folks want to do, have all the high schools graduate on the same day?
That was one of the theories, yep, exactly.
All right, thank you.
Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
Yes, Governor, I want to ask really briefly about hospitalizations. You know, we were so close, but we did not make it to that 14 straight days of declines in hospitalizations. What impact is that going to have on reopening? Do we need to kind of start all over again?
No. So the concept is a rolling average. So, you know, we know that particularly as the hospitalizations continue to decline, eventually they'll flatten out, right? They're not going to go to zero. And so the concept was 14 days of a continuous decline, but looking at a rolling average. So today's just one data point, but we're obviously going to be watching it very carefully in the coming days.
And as we look ahead to that May 20th date, we're hearing from restaurants and salons about not getting guidance of what they're going to need to do once they reopen on the 20th. Do you have any benchmarks for them, what they need to be doing?
Yeah, I can tell you that our committee is working closely with salons and restaurants and all the other different industry groups out there, getting their very best ideas in terms of what are the protocols to keep their customers safe and keep their employees safe. And we're going to be able to roll that out into a set of guidance, I think, before the end of this week.
Fox 61.
Hi, Governor. Jen Bernstein here.
Hey, Jen.
I just wanted to follow up on an unemployment issue which you and I discussed last week. People are still not getting through to the Department of Labor and not getting money. Many say that they can respect the fact that DOL is swamped, but they just can't understand why a human can't get on the phone or answer an email to them. Is there an update from the Department of Labor on the communication issue there?
Do you have an update on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, we definitely acknowledge it's been hard to get through on the phones at times. The team has been rapidly increasing the size of the call center staff there. I think it's now quadrupled from where it was when this crisis began. They're working around the clock trying to get back to people. I will just point out that the team, through their hard work, has now processed over 400,000 unemployment claims, and we're now just an inch short of $1 billion of unemployment compensation that's been paid out to the people of Connecticut. So the money is moving, but we do understand and that some people have not been able to get through and how frustrating that is for folks, and we're working around the clock to try to fix that.
And I know we discussed this a little bit yesterday with the doctors, but what's the guidance on doctors in general, oral surgeons, dentists, orthodontists? I know that Dr. Saud Anwar talked about this, as well as Dr. Pettit a little bit, but it does seem complicated. And from a regulatory point of view and putting out an executive order and rules to follow, how do you tackle that?
Well, that is incredibly complicated. Obviously, dentistry, for example, the nature of what type of mask, N95 or otherwise, it may be required. So we're taking a cautious look. And again, we're talking to the Dentistry Association, getting the very best ideas we can in terms of how we can do this safely. I can tell you that Josh has been talking to the hospitals on a daily basis as well in terms of their being able to get back in terms of doing more of the elective surgery, because some of that is piled up and it's getting time to do.
Thank you.
Hearst, Connecticut Media.
Thanks, Max. Governor, to what degree was there pushback from towns and school superintendents who maybe thought that they should have gone ahead for this last month and a half of school?
Miguel has talked to each and every one of them, so he's better able to answer it. But I didn't hear much pushback. You know, to tell you the truth, Ken, I was the guy probably saying, hey, let's wait a little bit longer. Let's see if there's some way we can have 2 weeks back there to give some completion. But I think the overwhelming majority of parents, teachers, and maybe even students thought this was the right thing to do.
And Commissioner, how would you describe the distance learning experience of the Alliance schools, the inner city schools, the neighborhoods where kids don't have Wi-Fi?
Right. So I spoke to representatives from those districts, and there are really good examples of distance learning in every district. In fact, on our website we have webinars that were put on by districts, many of them Alliance districts, on great practices that are happening. New Haven presented one. But even in those communities, we know that there are some students that don't have access to Wi-Fi. We know that there are students that don't have access to a device. So we're not slowing down at all in our efforts to try to provide equity and access throughout Connecticut. And I think that's something that we're going to be thinking about as we look to use our CARES funds, stimulus funds, to try to make sure that we're leveling the playing field a little bit more in those communities.
And the telecom companies were pretty frank about saying they were going to expand Wi-Fi access to those kids in those communities where they didn't have access now at no charge. So I think we'll remind them of that commitment.
Thanks, Governor.
CT News Junkie.
Hi, thanks, Max. My question is for Commissioner Cardona. What is being done with the special ed population? Is it possible to get a paraprofessional or a teacher to go to a student's house maybe sooner than even summer school at this point? Is that something that you guys are looking at?
Hi, thank you, Christine. The Reopen Connecticut Task Force is really going to be driving a lot of the decisions that are going to be made with regard to reentry. That has been discussed, and we're discussing summer school options and how to give access to those students that need access to learning where the laptop doesn't work. We know that students with special needs are students that we want to make sure we engage, but we're going to do so not only with the Reopen Connecticut education guidance, but also with the health team guidance to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's safe for the staff member, but also for the student.
Okay, so that's something that you haven't come to a decision on yet?
We haven't come to a decision on what summer school will look like specifically for students with special needs, but know that that is one of the areas of focus that we really want to prioritize.
And would these summer schools be, the summer schools or even, I guess, the daycares be limited to 10 people as they are now?
I can
speak
take
to
that.
the summer school and okay, yeah, thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Christine, for that question. Yes, we anticipate that the maximum group size will remain 10 as it is with childcare for camps.
Thank you.
Hartford Current.
Hi, Kathleen McWilliams here. My first question for the governor is, what factors went into the decision to close this week, and why were you hesitant to make that call?
Well, we're coming up on May 20th, so we had to give, some pretty clear guidance. And I think we looked around the region, we looked around the state, we saw the fact that there still is an infection rate that's not under control in all places. We saw that schools, maybe the students are local, but the teachers and administrators drive often a distance to get there. And we thought that this was probably the right decision to lend some clarity to people, at the same time working with Beth and Miguel to make sure in July and August we were already getting ready for education, making sure there's an educational component to the summer leading to the fall term again.
Thank you. And for Commissioner Bai, you mentioned that there is still some space in childcare programs in the state. Do you have a sense at what capacity these programs are filled right now?
It's a great question. It really varies a lot by programs. We have limited program size to 30, so a lot of them are not at their usual capacity, although we have granted more than 50 waivers to programs to have more than 30 children once they can show us that they can maintain the social distancing and separation of groups. I think that's what's key, is making sure that if you have group sizes of 10 and sort of pods of 30, that you can maintain that separation as good public health practice. So we were estimating about a month ago that there still was supply. We had not run into, we are measuring every day. We've lost some more centers over the past 2 weeks, but family child care has remained open at about 60%. Where only about 25% of centers are open. So we do know there's some supply, and some of that is really driven by parent choices, as I talked about with the camps. Some parents are choosing to keep their children with family and friends or to keep them at home with them. And I think parents will continue to make those calculations and watch these reports from Governor Lamont and make individual decisions. But we do believe that our efforts to support supply with grants to programs that are open, recognizing the extra expenses, our programs specifically for hospital workers, and some of our efforts that we're just starting up to give a little extra support to family child care are maintaining supply. And if that changes, we will implement other items to maintain that critical supply.
Thank you.
Connecticut Mirror.
Hello. I am curious about school funding, and given that municipalities are currently proposing budgets for their schools as well as school districts are going to be crafting their budget. I'm curious, Governor, what your guidance is for providing funding for municipalities and what they should expect for education levels, as well as whether or not municipalities will be able to reduce funding for their contributions towards education.
Miguel, if you're there, do you want to start off with that?
So, yes, thank you. We know that at this time, with what's happening in education, we need more, not less. We know that our students are experiencing trauma, so the need for social and emotional supports is great. The fact that we might go into school at a phased-in model, we know that distance learning still will be a part of the Tier 1 programming. So we want to send a message that it's critically important to support our schools. With that said, we know that the impact of COVID-19 is going to affect all sectors, including education. We've tried to identify the priorities for school funding and where the funding should go from CARES Act. And we hope that while it's very difficult to balance, we know that education is the foundation for many communities, and we want to make sure that our students are also supported during this time.
Commissioner Cardona, I think you can turn your camera on as well. Thank you. Is that all from Connecticut Mirror?
So just to follow up, I want to make sure I understand, as municipalities are beginning to fund, to make recommendations for funding levels for municipalities, should they be anticipating that state funding will remain level in anticipation of increased need that COVID has impacted communities?
Yeah, I would just start. We're trying to work off of a base of level funding as best we can, given the fact that we're looking at the potential for a $3 billion shortfall next year. That said, we're still negotiating down in Washington, D.C., see what type of support we get from Washington. All the states are on this, Republicans and Democrats alike, because they're going to help us with this guidance. They may be requiring smaller class sizes. And that would mean we'd need some additional teaching support to take over, for the extra students in that other classroom. So there are a lot of contingencies we're thinking about, but right now it's too early to say because we don't quite know what the rules of the road are going to be coming forward in September. So that said, I think most people are working on a base case that we're going to be pretty consistent to last year.
And then just one quick follow-up as far as summer school goes. The comment about June 29th and the summer programming for camps, does that also extend to summer school as well, that summer schools can resume summer school then as well?
Did you hear that,
Happy to
Beth?
take that.
Or Miguel?
Yeah, I can take it unless, Miguel, you want to take it either way.
And Commissioner Cardona, could you turn on your camera, please?
I have it on, Max.
All right.
I have it on.
Got it. Thank you.
So with regard to summer school, we are working with the Reopen Committee to look at standards on how to reintegrate students. As you know, most of the summer school programs, if not all of them, will be inside the schoolhouse. So we have to make sure we appropriately plan for that, which is a little bit different than some of the camp programming.
And I would just add to that we're really hopeful that the schools, and we'll be communicating with schools that do host summer programs, summer camps, that they will make the buildings available, even if that's before summer school starts. And I know Commissioner Cardona and I have been in touch with some of the leadership to make that request.
Thank you.
Connecticut Public Media.
This is Allie Rashafsky for WNPR. What happens to students who lose ground during this distance learning? How will the state manage that, especially for those students in more vulnerable communities in comparison to suburban students?
Well, I'll start with that.
So
that's in part why we made such a big effort in terms of additional laptops, in terms of free Wi-Fi, and maybe just as importantly, getting those scholastic reading materials out bilingual. So to make sure that nobody is on the wrong side of that digital divide, that we maintain the communication. I've been talking to Miguel a lot about how we can at least bring this current school year to a conclusion in the sense that the teacher has a chance, at least by telephone at a minimum, to get together with the parent, to get together with the child, talk about what they've learned in the last 90 days, where mom or dad thinks they are in the learning process. We think about who needs extra help perhaps during the summer as we gear towards the new school year.
Thank you, Governor. If I can add to that, the State Department of Education is developing modules, online modules, that we're going to make available to all districts to support some of the learning loss. We're going to provide this free of charge for all districts. And in some cases, districts are thinking about, do they use their funding to try to buy online programming? What we're saying is we want to provide the tools that our students need to limit learning loss. We're also going to connect with summer camps to make sure that they have that available. So any opportunity students get to engage with adults, it could be grounded around some of the learning concepts that they would have had in the grade level that they left.
Thank you.
Boceto Media.
Good afternoon, everyone. Governor Lamont, there are over 528,000 students that speak a second language other than English at home. As a result, their parents are having trouble to adapt to the virtual learning and trying to understand the language when helping their children. How is the state going to guide these families with the new virtual learning for positive outcomes?
I'll start, then maybe Miguel, you can help me out with this. First of all, as I pointed out, all of our learning materials are at least at a minimum bilingual. Perhaps there's some communities where we got to do a better job of helping people learn how to use the streaming technology and the platform and the electronics there. And I think we probably have to think about how we can do that to make sure nobody is left behind. Miguel?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Governor. And thank you for the question, Maria Carmen. It's critically important that subgroups of students that, the laptop is not enough, because if the materials are coming in English and the student doesn't speak English, that's challenging. We onboarded Director of Equity and Language, Dr. Labas, who has over 30 years experience in teaching English to second language learners and bilingual education. She's working with districts to support their growth and their ability to meet the needs of those learners. We're also providing materials online, as mentioned by the governor, in 2 languages. And we understand, much like students with special needs, that students that are learning English as a second language is another subgroup of students that we want to focus our efforts on as well.
Okay, my second question will be, Governor, chronic absenteeism during virtual learning could be an indication that something is not right, whether at home or with a child. How will schools continue to give psychological and emotional support in this new era? Thank you.
Did you hear that, Miguel?
So the question was regarding meeting the needs of English learners when they come back into the schools? I just want to make sure I got the whole question.
For children or teenagers in school age that are chronically absent from schools, and that could be an indication that's happening.
Thank you. So yeah, sorry, you were breaking up a little bit. I couldn't hear the question that well. So one of the things that we're really focusing on is making sure that we're engaging students that are harder to engage with this distance learning. So districts have family school liaisons that are reaching out, staff members whose job it is just to reach out to re-engage those students, because as you noted, that's a concern for us. We still have communities in Connecticut that have a difficult time consistently getting students to engage in learning, and that's an area that we're continuing to focus on as well.
The Day of New London.
Oh, hey, it's Kimberly Jollick from The Day. I wondered if you could talk a little more about if there's going to be social distancing in place in the fall, and what kind of support you'll offer school districts to kind of accomplish that as far as facilities and any funding.
Go ahead, Miguel.
Sure. So thank you for the question. Our schools were not outfitted for social distancing. If anything, we try to encourage, wherever possible, learning in community. We know that's how students learn best. some of the materials, the table, the chairs, the classroom designs have all promoted learning together. What we're going to do is make sure that we take guidance from our health partners in the health committee to make sure that our buildings are safe for students and safe for staff. And that might mean that we take spaces like the cafeteria or the gymnasium, and for part of the day when they're not in use them for learning spaces, or that we look creatively at how we use big spaces like media centers to split them up to provide opportunities for students to learn while maintaining that social distance. This is some of the work that we're doing at the reopening committee, and this is some of the work that we're taking input from educators and different stakeholders throughout the state of Connecticut to be best informed to guide them as they think about this in the fall.
Waterbury Republican American.
Thank you, Matt. Well, my first question is, when will summer school start? Because you guys weren't very clear on that answer. Is it June 29th? Is it before June 29th? Is it after June 29th?
Sure. Summer school will start as soon as the reopen committee develops some guidance on how to provide summer school safely in schools. We're hoping that if the trends continue the positive way they're going and we maintain social distancing, we're hoping to have summer schools open in July. But again, a lot of that is dependent on what the trends are in Connecticut and what we hear with regard to how to maintain safe learning environments inside the schoolhouses. We want to get it as early as possible, but not too early where it's unsafe.
What will be the
now? Let me just add to that. I'm sorry. You know, we haven't stopped providing distance learning opportunities or materials for students, so it's not like we're stopping learning. We anticipate that there's going to continue to be a flow of information to families and students so that they can continue their learning, but the physical summer school opportunities within schools will happen likely July. We'd like to say shoot for July.
What will the class sizes be? If the current limit on childcare is 10 in a setting, if it's social gatherings is 5, how big classes going to be?
Well, Paul, I can just say from our guidance, and then I'll let Miguel go, is that, you know, the guidance from the Center for Disease Control, our own Department of Public Health, and the doctors working on the reopen committee are looking at the guidelines, which do change. As the commissioner said, you know, having sat in on these meetings, I know that they're looking at data all the time and making their best decisions. But it's May 5th, and it will be a couple of weeks before we know what happens with the trends. But I'll turn it over to Miguel.
Sure. No, that's a good question about class size during summer school. We will follow the guidance of CDC and our reopen committee, and it'll likely be similar sizes to what we're hearing about with camps.
Is there any thought being given to having double sessions at summer schools and regular school during the regular school year, where half the school will come in the morning and the other half will come in the afternoon?
Yes, those are things that have been are being considered. We have a lot of different options to consider what works for students, what works for school communities, and what we want to do is be conscious of the fact that if we're making decisions in some communities, it has an impact on other communities, because we know that a teacher might teach in one community but have his or her children attend a school in a different community. So these are all things that we're considering, split days, what impact that has, how much of it is distance learning, how much of it is schoolhouse learning, to be able to comply with the health standards.
Associated Press.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. When will a decision be made in terms of when students will go back to school in the fall? And also, will students in elementary grades, will they still get a report card for this school year?
Thank you. So the decision to reopen in the fall is something we're looking forward to providing based on the data that we have now soon. I mean, families need to know what we're thinking about with regard to reopening schools. There's a level of confidence that we have to make sure we provide for families to feel comfortable sending their children to school. That's paramount. So we hope to provide projections of what we're anticipating relatively soon. But again, this decision is going to be made with the input of education, the Reopen Committee, which is made up of educators from different areas and different types of educators, whether they're administrators, district leaders, or school leaders, classroom teachers. So that input will be taken into account, and we want to communicate that as early as possible. But keep in mind that depending on the trends over the summer, that'll determine the level of confidence we have later in the summer to follow those plans. We'll adjust as necessary. The health trends will really dictate the speed with which we return.
What about the report cards for elementary?
The report cards, yes. Thank you. Yes, districts are reaching out. We know that just like graduations are important for high school students, getting a final end of the year report from the teacher is something that's really important. We're encouraging districts to continue that. I know for my kids, we get messages regularly on how they're performing and what they're doing well, and we anticipate that there's going to be communication on students' grades at the end of the year. We expect that.
And Governor, today, Hartford Mayor Luke Bronin was talking about seeing a spike in calls for cardiac arrest. And there's actually been a spike in the number of people who have died before they made it to the hospital. And there was a thought that maybe people are afraid to go to hospitals if they're feeling symptoms, or maybe COVID may be related to these cardiac arrests. Is this something that you guys are keeping track of and is something that you're concerned about?
I have thought about this. I was talking to Dr. Albert Coe about this today. I mean, he made a very interesting observation. He says right now we have more testing capacity than people are using, and we have more hospital capacity than people are using. And maybe we have to do a better job of letting people know, you've got to go to the hospital before you're dangerously sick. And we're taking our testing mobile vans and the such out to the community to get more people tested, those that maybe even are a little reluctant to be tested. So I have to do a better job in terms of public health education on that. So I am thinking about that. And that's also part of the discussion about the elective surgeries, because some of these surgeries are surgeries that, cannot be put off. And we do have the capacity to do more there as well. Look, I think that's probably the last question. Let me just say, and where I started. I mean, our great strength as a state is our amazing education system. We have one of the great K through 12 education systems in the country, and we have people come from around the world to our universities. And we want them to stay. We want them to make sure that they know this is a place that they want to be. We made a big effort in terms of workforce and what we're going to try and do to make sure we're training people for the jobs that are out there. And so this is tough, saying we're not going to have traditional learning between now and the end of this and the end of June, but we are going to be leaders when it comes to non-traditional learning right now. And I'm not quite sure how long online learning and Zoom learning is going to be non-traditional. My instinct is it may be part of a hybrid plan going forward. And I'd like to think, working with Miguel and Beth and our amazing team, Connecticut will continue to be a leader here as well. And, to our parents and the kids out there, think about this as a new way to learn. And this is not a lost opportunity, it's a new opportunity. And that's the way I'm going to think about it. We're going to make sure that this summer and this fall, you're learning at your very best. Thanks, everybody.